This is a talk about GA4 mistakes to avoid, and so we've got about 45 minutes-ish sort of just to go through the sort of mistakes that we've encountered, and just basically the aim here really is to give people a bit of a heads up and things to kind of look out for, especially given that the announcement about the end of life for GA3. All right, it's 5 minutes in, so we might as well get started. So obviously myself, Will, and Gabriel, I'm not sure if he's on the call at the moment, but I think he's joining in a second present. So we're MeasureMinds based near Bristol, but with a team of almost 15 now, based all around the world, with a focus on GoogleAnalytics, GTM, Data Studio, and also cookie compliance, and normally working on some fairly large kind of international sort of deployments. So here's some of the brands that we worked with. Some of them are beasts. So Rentokil is a bit of a BM off, and some other big sites. And Nat Geo is pretty big as well. Cool. We normally sort of cover GoogleAnalytics and GTM and set up some implementations, but we're also doing conversion rate optimization as well, which is a natural progression from Google Analytics, and also a good use case for using your data to drive improvements. Also, given that Google Analytics 4 now integrates with Google Optimize, it kind of makes sense to make sure that's linked and then start doing A/B tests. Google Optimize also integrates with AdWords now as well for personalization. So it's one of the areas that we'd recommend kind of changing the link over for your A/B testers to switch the connection from GA3 to GA4 for A/B testing. Cool. A little bit of a background. Most people obviously know this already. So GA4 is going to be dead in about a year and 3 months time, or July or so. For 360 customers, they get an extra 6 months, and there's going to be a grace period after that time from July where you'll still be able to access reports, but it won't process any hits. So in effect, it becomes read-only mode. So there's no need to panic in the sense that you still got a year sort of to make changes. However, if you want to be able to do year-on-year comparisons with GA4 versus GA3, then the sooner you start, the better. Also, your remarketing lists from GA3 won't migrate to GA4. So another reason you want to migrate as soon as possible, just to start building out your cookie pools. We've done a blog post on a more basic level of the changes with GA4, which is mentioned there. So it's not new in terms of Google Analytics kind of upgrading. So obviously when it was Urchin, then became Google Analytics, and Google Analytics, so GA Classic was migrated to GA.JavaScript, and they had a kind of migration path for that. However, with GA Classic, that was a seamless migration in the sense that the interface didn't change. You could still run reports. It just how the data was sort of rendered was slightly different. So, for instance, user dimensions, if you remember them, became or custom variables became custom dimensions, and but the other sort of fields like events, page views, transactions were pretty similar. Obviously, with enhanced transaction, standard e-commerce became enhanced e-commerce, etc. But the interface itself wasn't radically different, and there was an upgrade path. GA4 is slightly different. It's event-based. There's not an upgrade path. So your GA3 data, in effect, that's going to become you're no longer usable. So you in effect have to start with a clean slate, which is obviously not great for benchmarking, but yeah, there's no other option at the moment. So we're going to, as with a lot of talks I've done in the past, so this one's got a bit of Avengers theme. So as Urchin was started in 2012 or so, and it's a bit like Avengers Endgame on the 2019 or so. As with Avengers, everyone knows that Iron Man kind of dies at the end. So it's kind of a bit of the case of what's going to happen with GA3. But GA4 does have a lot of new core features and tools within it, which potentially you can't do in GA3. So there are benefits such as BigQuery integration, which is used to cost $150,000 or so, now free, and also the ability to implement and an extra 5 custom dimensions and better kind of real-time reports, and also better machine learning and even hourly alerts rather than daily alerts. So it's good long term. However, there are things to look out for, like bad guys that might catch you out when you're migrating or setting up GoogleAnalytics 4. So we're going to start with some kind of gotchas. So the first one is, there's one of the ways of upgrading analytics with JavaScript to GA4 is there's actually an automatic tick box that does all the work for you and converts your GA3 events into GA4 events. Now, that sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Like literally just a button that does the work for you. What's the point of us doing this webinar if it's that easy? Surely there's a catch. It's not like a booby trap or anything. Why would Google give you an option of doing the work for you? If you know, what's the catch? Well, for those of you that might have heard of GA Spy, which was a way of converting analytics or JavaScript and also GA Classic from, in effect, local scoped sort of push values into global scope, or in effect converting inline GA code into data layer pushes. And that worked by piggybacking the existing inline GA code and converting it into global objects. Really handy when you didn't have the ability to edit the inline code, however, it's not a great solution. The reason it's not a great solution is that Google have said that analytics.javascript and GA.javascript and potentially urchin.javascript are all going to stop working in a year and 3 months' time. So ultimately, it means they've given you a solution that may also stop working, which is a bit crazy. But you can see on Google's own help page, they basically say, yeah, don't use this feature. Because it's very limited. You can't do custom dimensions, you can't do enhanced e-commerce, can't do user ID, not best practice. And I don't think Google have even clearly thought this one through, because you know, if analytics, if the JavaScript libraries themselves don't work, or there's a declaration error with one of the GA objects, then that GA Spy equivalent potentially may not work. So don't use that button. Instead, fix the actual inline code and upgrade to data layer pushes, and then do it properly. Cool. So the other one is within GA3, there was the ability to separate out your development traffic. So you could add an exclude hostname filter and say, you know, take this data out. You know, I'm doing test transactions. I don't want this data skewing my live data. I don't want, you know, maybe test conversions being imported into AdWords or etc. So GA4, or at least the free version of GA4, doesn't have the ability to do any data filters within it. You can't even do filtered profiles, which is not great. So there is a way around that, though, thankfully. So you can add a client-side switch. So what we mean by that is, if you see the options here, where's the oops, just find the okay, laser button on here, there we go. So here we've got a GA4 account here, which is live, in a GA4 account that's development, and we've created a lookup table within GTM that just splits out these two IDs. So that then means that any tests on development are not going to affect live data, and it obviously gets around the fact that there's no ability to add filters in the free version of GA4. So that's important, especially if you've got any automated tests that you're using. You just don't want to have that data being massively skewed. Also, given that IP filters have anonymized IP enabled by, and you can't turn off in GA4, So another reason why you want to separate out your development and test traffic. Another one, which is a bit of a gotcha, is not adding exclude referrals. Well, those of you familiar with GA3 may be well aware of the fact that you have to add exclude referrals. If you don't add them for things like payment portals like PayPal or Stripe, then your sessions get reset, everything gets attributed to paypal.com rather than Google Organic or Google Paid or the originating source. So super, super important. Your data pretty much becomes useless if you don't add this setting. GA3 unfortunately doesn't import, GA4 doesn't import your exclude referral settings. So you have to physically go in and add them. This is under data streams, more settings, and then manage ignore referrals. And you need to add your own host name in that list, as well as payment referrals, or if you use surveying tools like SurveyMonkey or Typeform, you need to add them in that list. Sometimes live chat tools you need to add in there as well. So if you don't do this, your data is pretty much not going to be any use. So super, super important to add. Another one, which is also a default setting, and I don't know why Google do this, but they do, is when you first create your GA4 account, it will default to only remember the last 2 months of data, which sounds completely crazy, especially when you want to do a year-on-year comparison with GA3. So you have to remember to change this to the maximum, which is 14 months. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do any comparisons. So that's under admin, data settings, data retention, and 14 months here. Another one, this is a little bit of a controversial one, and I'd only suggest doing this on brand new GA4 accounts, not existing accounts, is I recommend changing, let's just say the word second, the default setting for engagement from 10 seconds up to 30 seconds. For those of you familiar with GA3 or GA Universal, you might be sometimes add a heartbeat, which is normally 30 seconds. And that's to keep the session alive, so that if someone is engaged but still got the window or the website open, it's basically to convert them into an interactive session and improve bounce rate and time on site. It's kind of the DAA or Digital Analytics Association normally defaults. They recommend about 30 seconds. Also tools like Snowplow, Yandex Metric also default to 30 seconds. So it's a bit strange why Google have picked 10 seconds here for engagement rate, but personally I recommend changing it to 30 seconds only on new accounts though. If you've already got it set to the default of 10 seconds, don't change it. And it also means if you've got heartbeats present on GA3 and then you're comparing to GA4, it makes the comparison more reliable. So number 6, we've got custom dimensions in GA4. So there are some that you will always need, which should be present out of the box, but they're not. So user ID and dimensions within GA4, they're all lowercase with underscores as separators, and then Americanized for Zs in this case. So you will definitely need user ID, event category, event action, event label, etc., and also optimized variation. And when I created this, page path wasn't available as a dimension, but literally in the last 2 days or so, I think they've added like landing page and page path as dimensions. So yeah, definitely add these parameters because you're going to need them for when you're migrating, especially events from GA3 over to GA4. And also, if you want that data being pulled through into BigQuery, you're going to need to enable them as well. One that I forgot actually to add to this list is non-interactive event. Now, important thing to note here is that the ability to do non-interactive events doesn't exist in GA4. So if you have, let's say, a JavaScript error tracker that's present on load, that is actually going to cause bounce rate to break. Yeah, there's the only thing you can do is in BigQuery, you could send the parameter of non-interactive, and then you can adjust bounce rate sort of settings within BigQuery instead. But yeah, so I forgot the event non-interactive in that one. Cool. I'll do questions at the end, just because I can't really see them as we're going through. So linking to other Google tools. So obviously it's a Google product, so it's naturally going to connect to Google AdWords. Also, it pushes to BigQuery, connects to Google Optimize, and there's a new one, GA4 does integrate with Merchant Center, which is actually cool because GA3 doesn't do that. So pretty cool. And Google Search Console obviously should be on that list. You need to remember to link these tools up in order to get maximum benefit from them, and in order to start collecting data that can be used for analysis or remarketing. BigQuery is especially important to link because obviously it's going to be doing a daily export. You forget to link that, you can't do any analysis from that until it's connected. On your remarketing list, I mentioned that your remarketing lists are going to get reset. So super important that you kind of copy those over, import into Google AdWords. Also, demographics doesn't get enabled in GA4 by default. You have to go in and tick the box for GA signals to turn that on. Then you can see demographic data. So just really as a reminder that you've got to migrate those remarketing audiences. Again, it's not an automatic thing. So this one here, this is actually slight overlap between GTM Server-Side and BigQuery and GA4. So if although GA4 is free, the BigQuery hosting of the data from GA4 to BigQuery, and also if you're using GTM Server-Side, you have to host the GTM Server-Side container. Both of those have a very small cost associated, but it does mean you have to add a billing entity into Google Cloud. Why is that important? Well, it's really important if you're using GTM Server-Side and your credit card for whatever reason gets blocked, and what happens there is potentially that can knock out GTM Server-Side and stop any tracking pixels being collected, be it GTM Server-Side going into GA4 or anything in there. So it's super important to add a backup payment option. So I normally suggest adding a direct debit and then add the credit card as the fail-safe one. Obviously, this means that if it would prevent any outages going from GA4 through to BigQuery as well. So if you haven't added that fallback payment mechanism, you definitely need to. And we do a client site recently, and we're scratching our head as to why it suddenly it had gone offline, and it just turned out that a particular credit card got a security warning on it, and that knocked out GTM Server-Side. So can't emphasize the importance of this one. The other one, so as with when you add an event into Google Analytics 3, you had to kind of set that event as a goal. You kind of have to do the same with adding goals into GA4. It's slightly easier to do, though. You don't have to set a category action label. You just have to mark an event as a conversion. But you need to do that and then import that conversion into AdWords. The key thing here really is to make sure you don't double import. So if you've got AdWords connected to GA3 and GA4, you'll need to turn off the GA3 connection. Otherwise, you're going to have two conversions for the same thing, and it means that you're going to overbid for CPAs. So it's stating the obvious here, really, but very important to get right. So that was our top 10 tips. There are a lot more that we kind of came up with, but maybe we'll cover them in the comments and questions afterwards. The other ones that we've not mentioned, which is sort of stating the obvious here, really, but GA4 does have these newer features, so it's better for IP anonymization. It's on by default. There are ways of setting it in cookieless kind of mode, and it has regional controls for data retention. And soon they're going to have a European data center as well. So it gets around some of the problems with data being passed to America. And alerts are hourly rather than a daily, and there's potentially more flexibility and also some cool features with predictive audiences and the machine learning kind of piece baked into it. And obviously, a free connection to BigQuery, which used to cost a crazy amount of money. And a native user ID sessionization, whereas GA3 you had to create a separate profile to do user ID sessionization. That's now native, much better solution. And then they even introduce a tertiary sessionization using a cookieless method at some point in the future, in a similar way to what Snowplow currently supports. One thing, actually, I didn't mention this in this list here, but I'll mention it verbally. GA4 cross-domain tracking works slightly differently, and the parameters are different. If you've ever done cross-domain tracking with the Google AdWords conversion linker, you may notice it's the same method. We actually had an instance where, because the cross-domain tracking uses a wildcard or a star when it passes cross-domain, and which in most cases doesn't cause any problems, but it turns out on WordPress sites where you have a specific kind of security plugin installed, if you ever use a wildcard on a landing page and then have a form on that landing page that posts that form data through to a WordPress server, that wildcard or star can get sanitized or basically replaced with a null value, and it basically causes the data not to be collected and causes a 500 error. So the only kind of note there is on cross-domain tracking with GA4 is just double check that your forms all work correctly and that the wildcard issue does not break any sort of forms, because it's one of those kind of gotchas where you don't know about it unless actually you sort of test one of these particular scenarios. So I wish it'd be nice if they didn't use a star or wildcard for cross-domain tracking, but unfortunately GA4 does. It's a little bit of an edge case, but it is something that we've encountered on one of our client sites in QA sort of testing. So that's our kind of list. We're really interested to kind of see or hear what GA4 mistakes that you've encountered. So these, if you want to kind of put these in chat, or we can hand the baton, I'd be really interested to hear what your or anything that we've missed on that list. Also, what features do you think GA4 should add in the future? So my top one, which is a little bit cheeky, is make the interface of GA4 look like GA3. If there was a way of just kind of changing it to make it more easier to navigate, that would be awesome. And also, ability to share dashboards, regex support for goals, exclude parameters. We didn't even cover that actually in this list, so that's quite an important one. There is a workaround for exclude parameters where you rewrite the URL collected in GA4 and remove parameters that way, but it is a bit crazy that they don't support exclude params at the moment, especially if you've got like email addresses or something that potentially could be captured. Then it's not easy to remove them in the UI. And also there's not currently a way around sub-properties, or because of the way that the GA4 object works, you can't do different trackers, and that's something we're working to try and find a solution for, but it's annoying that doesn't, there's no way of doing a roll-up and a country tracker in GA4 without paying for the premium version. So I'm just going to jump over to chat now. oh, actually, before we go in, yeah, well, actually, I'll come back to this, but I'm going to jump to chat now. So I'm just going to read out these questions. How should you had a developer? Sorry, I don't quite. I'm not. How should you had a developer or main home office flag in GA4? Oh, right. Okay. How should you exclude your development traffic? So there's a couple of ways of doing that. There's a really good video by Analytics Mania that explains how you do it. You can you need to set a cookie that sets and then use that to well there's two ways. Either within the lookup table method that we showed earlier, you can set it so that when you're in preview mode in GTM, as in debug equals true, then your traffic is sandboxed into that development profile. So then that way, it wouldn't necessarily be a developer flag, but it would be any traffic would be sandboxed. When the other ways of doing it, you can use it's probably the only case where you can actually use the filters feature within GA4 is there's a way of setting is dev true, which can sort of sandbox or some of your sort of traffic, and you see the live real-time report feature. So that's the two ways of doing it. I'll try and find the video that the Analytics Mania one that also explains sort of how to do that. Is there any way to import data from GA4 from, I think you mean import data from GA3 or Universal into GA4? Great question. GA4 does support the ability to process historic data, which GA3 didn't. So if you send a timestamp in the past, in theory, it could create a hit or a session in the past. The tricky bit would be you'd have to get the granular data out of GA3 first, and then sort of push that data into GA4. So the harder bit is getting that raw data out of GA3. The other bit would be the how you would do the mapping, because obviously the model is different. It's all page views and events, whereas GA3 you got transactions, events, social events, and a few other sort of types. So there's not a one-to-one mapping there. Yeah, so it may be other providers come up with a solution for exporting and importing that data, but I've not seen anything yet. If you've got any tools that you've seen that do that, let me know. I'd be curious to see. It used to be that segment.io used to do historic collections, or what they called replay of a legacy GA3 events, but I don't think they've got a way of converting those events into GA4 even with replay. So yeah, I'm just going through the other sort of questions. Yeah, the new Spider-Man film is awesome. If anyone hasn't seen it, why event category action label? That's the names that GA3 uses. We would, if I haven't stated this already, is you should always do a parallel track. So never go GA4 only, always have GA3 and GA4. So we had one client that just went with GA4 only, and obviously the interface is quite different. So always double track or parallel track. Appreciate it, Navo. So how would you go about estimating time for a GA3 GA4 migration for an e-commerce client? they have their own developer, but so there are some really good variables that do the GA3 to GA4 mapping for you. So they convert the data layer into the format that GA4 needs to digest. So that makes the time involved to do an e-commerce migration really like very, very simple. And possibly if you send me an email, I can share that one of the templates that we use for doing an e-commerce sort of mapping, and you can import that into GTM. The only thing to note about that is there are some features that are data layer fields that don't exist within GA3 enhanced e-commerce that do exist within GA4. So obviously those wouldn't transfer over, but it means you wouldn't need to re-tag or do a whole data layer deployment. At the moment, we're still recommending doing a GA3 data layer, although with the missing sort of fields, if it's a case of it, the options available, we also suggest adding the GA4 data layer as well, but only if they've got extra resource. It's kind of a nice to have sort of thing. Where do you read about the EU news? It was on the Google privacy webinar that was 2 weeks ago, where they've publicly stated that they've got an EU data center for GA4 that's going to be available soon. It's not clear yet whether that's going to be on the free version of GA4 or the paid version. Is there a way to import? I'll just cover that one. Yeah, dimension widening. So dimension widening is supported for user ID and the event parameter. It's not supported for a geo IP country, product ID. I don't think page ID is supported either at the moment. Which is kind of a little bit annoying, but obviously you can do widening in BigQuery instead. Big mistakes feature is not having a library for custom segments. Yes, fair point. Yeah, it doesn't even auto recommend like a smart list. Yeah, I mean, I would say the same with dashboards. Dashboards in GA3, you could bulk import 20 dashboards or bulk import like 20 sort of custom segments. There's no option of doing that here, which is really annoying. And more integrations like Tableau would be nice. There's not. I haven't seen an integration with GA4 and Google Sheets yet. Obviously, we use the sort of free GA3 plugin for Google Sheets, which is quite handy. But yeah, it'd be nice if they could rework that for GA4. It does integrate with Data Studio though, so there's a free connector for GA4 to Data Studio, so you can change your existing connectors so that your Data Studio reports still continue to work. There is a feature called Exclude Internal Traffic. Believe that help. The Exclude Internal Traffic only works if you've got preview open in GTM and GA4 recognizes that. Then it does set a flag, which it's not necessarily as good as like sandboxing the whole of development traffic from my perspective. Is cookie consent different for GA4 compared to UA? Not strictly. The data from GA4 consent for the 5 categories of consent does pass through to BigQuery, which is different. But the consent mode, in theory, is supported in both GA3 and GA4, although the upscaling features within consent mode really are geared towards GA4. What I mean by that is if you've got someone that rejects cookies, but you get a cookieless pixel that's sent, that cookieless pixel can then be used for upscaling to say, okay, I had 10% of people that opted out or didn't accept cookies, and I got 90% of page views or sessions, times everything up to get it back up to the 100% using the opted out cookie sample size. So if Google ever gets hit with big changes within Safari, for instance, with what happened with Facebook on iOS, where it dropped down to a 10% sample, and GA4 is more prepared for the ability to do kind of upsampling. What on average time to migrate GA3 to GA4? Some corporates claim it's a few-month project. It kind of depends, really. I mean, there's probably not as many settings within GA4 to sort of change, but there's still a need to. More of the changes are within GTM for events and sort of updating Data Studio reports. I'm going to come on to the GTM side in a minute because we've got an announcement to make on that, which is going to kind of answer that question in a very interesting way, as in there may be an automatic way to migrate GA3 to GA4 events that we might announce very soon. Is it redundant to use to use a custom dimension on a timestamp? So you mean a timestamp as a custom dimension? I think there's a timestamp within BigQuery. So yes, if you're using BigQuery, in GA3 though, that may be useful in the same way that a session ID or session cookie in GA3 is sometimes useful. Yes, you get a copy of the recording. So you suggest 5 to 7 days work is sufficient estimate being factored in on testing time. Appreciate it depends on company size. It really depends if it's e-commerce or not, how many events there are to migrate within GA3, and how many custom dimensions need to be migrated, and if there's any specific kind of workarounds that need to be configured or sort of set up. If you want to reach out to hello@ or Chris or Sarah on the call, we can come up with a rough ballpark once we know more information. Single page application handling. So GA4 has a native kind of AJAX tracking, so it will record single page apps. Sometimes it doesn't always work quite correctly. So for instance, anchors, it doesn't always track correctly. So in that case, you have to add a manual virtual page view into GTM to push into GA4. And occasionally I've seen on some Gatsby sites it not quite working as expected with AJAX. And again, we have to use manual solutions to update the native AJAX virtual page view in GA4. Is there any features like including filters only based on the basis of geolocation? Unfortunately, not at the moment. Your only options would be you can install a GeoIP script on your site and then do the logic within GTM that does sort of filtering for geolocation, but there's no way to do an include or exclude. Last we have a view of our target market, like US traffic goals. This ties in with good question, Mohammed. This ties in with it would in effect quite commonly GA3 you'd have a country filter. So let's say on the site you had /US, and then you'd create a folder, a profile include for that folder. And you could have a number of different countries. So in GA4, there's not a way of creating a sub profile in the free version or a filter profile. So instead, your only two options are either to create lots of new GA4 accounts per country and do the filtering within GTM or routing within GTM, or you'd use custom reports in GA4 which have the filters per country, or the other option would be to use Data Studio and use the filtering within Data Studio. It's really annoying that you can't do profile filters in GA4 and you can't do dual different tracker names within GA4 for rolled up or country at the moment. Cool. I'm just jumping over to the questions. If we've got any new ones. What changes for setting up GA4 for e-commerce? So you need to install a GA3 to GA4 mapping variable, and then add a new, obviously you need your GA4 page view event that's already present. Then you'd add a GA4 event, which is triggered on a white list of events that GA3 is outputting, like an add to cart or transaction, and those events you would map using like a one-to-one lookup table for the equivalent name in GA4. I'll see if I can share the template which shows you a working example of that after this call, but it's once you've done it once, it's fairly straightforward to do. Cool. Okay, so I'm just looking at time. We've got another 15 minutes left. Cool. Yeah. If you ping me a reminder after this, and I'll share the e-commerce template. So I've obviously gone into questions already. So we'll list these on a blog in terms of these migration tips that we've mentioned. We should also mention that we've got a GTM Cleaner Tool, and we've literally just yesterday added a free GA3 to GA4 migration within the Pro version of that tool. So I'll just put a link in the chat window to that tool. Which is there. And within that tool, so if you wait for it to jump back, so the light version of this tool doesn't have the GA3 to GA4 feature within it, so you have to click on the Pro version, which is free. That version, it will ask you to authenticate. And it needs that so that it can create a separate workspace within GTM. A workspace is a way of kind of rolling forward or backwards, or deleting a bunch of changes, or creating changes in a separate space. So if you click on the Pro version and authenticate, if you select a container that you want to migrate, and then you'll see a tick box for a setting that will say also migrate GA3 to GA4 events. So GTM Cleaner, it's always going to for at least the next 3 months, it's going to remain like completely free. So we're using that ourselves internally on all of our clients. So it's been pretty heavily tested already, and it will help you speed up those GA4 migrations. One thing I would just ask, if you could give us feedback on the tool, that would be amazing. And also just a shout out, we've got a Chrome plugin that allows you to export either your versions as a CSV or Google Sheets, or you might have noticed on some of the screenshots, any tables within GTM, it will create a little click to export. Quite a cool little handy feature, and then again, totally free, but this one's a Chrome plugin. There's a link to it here. And I'll skip over that one for the moment. And then we've got some other sort of tools in the pipeline. Yeah, so one other sort of thing, it'd be great, as I said, if you could list, let us know what features in GA4 do you wish they would kind of add in the future. So we'll probably do a follow-up sort of blog post asking you to kind of add a bunch of missing stuff, like regex goals or exclude parameters. But if there's certain features that you notice that are missing, if we can put them all together, and then hopefully you will add those missing features. So like an annotation API would be handy. Cool. And just one other quick sort of shout out or mention is if you haven't already seen this, there's also GA4 demo account. So if you search for GA4 demo account, and there's two, there's one for app, one for web. Again, good example kind of data set that you can use for seeing what the data could look like. So that's just linked on there. It says GA4 demo. So that's probably the final tip for now. Also, I just had to give a shout out to the Google official kind of sort of tips, sort of checklist that they recommend for migrating, and that's it for now. So if you have any further questions, or you want us to give you a quote on a GA3 to GA4 migration, or if you just want to sort of use the tool that will do some large chunks of that for you, please be my guest. And that's probably it for now. I'll just double check in questions, see if there's any final sort of questions within the list. There's a video explaining the GTM Cleaner Tool coming soon as well. All right, thanks everyone. I'm in Brighton for tomorrow, so if anyone's at Brighton SEO, feel free to reach out to me and say hello. All right, thanks everyone.